Support American-made tariff-free clothing with American Giant. They aren't affected by tariffs because their clothing products never left the U.S. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com.
And welcome to the Worldview 2 Washington Report for this evening, Tuesday evening, February 27th, 2025. Joining me is our D.C. correspondent, Jim Paff. Jim, I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend there in the nation's capital.
Absolutely did. Enjoyed it with my wife and celebrating those who sacrificed for us. And it was pleasant to see that we're having a much better pitch at that with this administration as opposed to the last one.
Yeah, indeed. Were there a lot of celebrations this weekend in the nation's capital?
There were, and we got excellent coverage of Donald Trump at the Tomb of the Unknowns. There was, as usual, a massive music celebration with a lot of artists and bands over on the mall, and it was a good time, seemed to be had by all.
Yeah, indeed. We were just at Arlington National Cemetery a couple weeks ago. We did a lot of filming, and we'll be bringing some of that to you. But here's a little bit, folks. Here's President Trump this weekend, Arlington National Cemetery, actually yesterday, Monday. Here we go.
The wreath is now being placed by the president.
All right, we were standing right back behind where the president is on the first step there. You'll see that first step right behind him. We were standing right there just a few weeks ago. By the way, that black mat, you guys notice anything about that black mat? Notice anything? What do you not see? What do you not see on that black mat? I'll tell you what you don't see. What you don't see is the worn out portion at the far end, and then the white marks that are made as they march or stop and turn in the center on the other end. You don't see a worn out mat. When we were there a few weeks ago, it was worn. I don't know how many times a year they replaced that black mat, but it jumped out at me. They decided for Memorial Day and the president's presentation there at the wreath laying, they would put out a brand new mat. There you go. You've been to Arlington National Cemetery to know what I'm talking about, haven't you, Jim?
Oh, yeah. I hadn't noticed it when you just mentioned it, but you're right. Those are typically worn out sections. By the way, one of the great things about that particular area is that America's most awarded soldier of all time and movie star Audie Murphy is buried right there. You walk out, so to behind Donald Trump's right shoulder, you go past the viewing area there and walk out towards the graves in the back. And Audie Murphy's grave is very close there. One of my heroes growing up.
Absolutely. And folks, we spent 2 days at Arlington National Cemetery filming. Audie Murphy's grave was one of them on the list we wanted to get to. We did not, along with several others we did not get to. But right now we're planning on going back to D.C. for more filming the middle of September. And Lord willing, we'll get there and film. We have several other places we want to go inside the cemetery and film and bring you footage of and information about. Audie Murphy, though, absolutely.
Oh, a hero growing up. I watched all of his movies when I was a kid. By the way, great story about Arlington if people don't know it. And it's interesting history. During the Civil War, they were running out of places to bury folks. And then General Montgomery Meigs, who was the quartermaster general of the Army during the Lincoln administration, he was a Georgian, but had sided with the Union side and really hated Robert E. Lee for not joining him in that effort. And as he was going around trying to figure out where they were going to continue to bury people, he confiscated Robert E. Lee's estate. And Robert E. Lee's house is right there at the top of the hill in Arlington. And to make an impression in his frustration, the first burials were buried in Mrs. Lee's garden. And it's a great story that everyone should look up. And there was a General Montgomery Meigs for 4 generations. General Montgomery Meigs IV, I think, passed away not too many years ago. But one of the great Civil War stories, and in honor of some of our greatest soldiers, those who sacrificed for our country. Every person, if you can, should come to Washington, D.C., and at a minimum, you need to go to Arlington National Cemetery, get a tour, learn about it. There's so much great history there.
100%. Been going there since I was 4 years old. And we did a lot of filming at the Arlington House, which, for those who don't know, was the home of Martha Washington's grandson. Martha Washington's grandson. And he and his wife had a daughter. And that daughter married Robert E. Lee. And they ended up living in the home. They were not allowed to be buried there. In fact, in the room there, one of the rooms that we filmed from, Robert E. Lee wrote back to Lincoln, turning down his offer to be the general of the Union.
And you and I were just standing at the place where that offer was made when you were in D.C. last with me. That's right.
That's right. Yep. So we did a lot of filming on the Lee Mansion and the history. And I have to tell you, I was a little discouraged, though, because it seems as though they're trying to make Robert E. Lee out to be a racist when he inherited slaves and then had to figure out, what do I do? And yet some of his slaves were so, I guess, respected him, liked him, that one of them stayed with him long after. And then another, who we saw pictures of, she protected his furniture, hid away his furniture from the Union of tearing it up. And all they did, tear up some dishes and stuff. And then she wrote a letter to Mrs. Lee after the Civil War to tell her where she was living. But they take a very complicated issue like slavery, which has been going on since pretty much the beginning of time. Still goes on to this day, by the way. But the liberals won't tell you it's the Islamists love to enslave people, including sex slaves. But that's, to the left, that's a great religion, right? But again, the death cults love death cults, right? Birds of a feather flock together. But poor Lee, Robert E. Lee, General Lee, he seems to be getting more and more mistreated as the years go on. And if we don't watch out, pretty soon, I think he won't even be mentioned other than in a negative way, the whole tour. Any of your concerns there, Jim?
Well, as with any man, he has his faults like the rest of us, but they are human faults. Right. Robert E. Lee, to my understanding, was not at all racist. In that day, there was so much misinformation and malinformation, if you'd like to call it that, about black African slaves, that there was really question about mental capability. So there were some really bad things out there that were actually rancid and rather evil. But certainly with Robert E. Lee, he, as you rightly point out, he inherited those slaves. He did not fight for the Confederacy to protect slavery. His purpose for it was, as he said, I don't want to betray my country. And by that, he meant Virginia. He had a very great devotion to his state. There is no doubt that the Civil War was fought over slavery. So we do need to recognize that. And there were many people in the South, obviously, that wanted to support it, but it's mostly the political actors, the wealthy, and the politicians in the South were mostly wanting to fight for slavery. They wanted that institution. So very convoluted period in history, but we go all the way back to the founding fathers. They set the time bomb that would get rid of slavery. There is no doubt that Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, both slave owners, and many others were unanimous in their belief that slavery needed to go away, that the institution needed to die. And the seeds of that death were planted in the Constitution. There are people on the left that tried to say that the 3/5 clause was a racist clause. It wasn't, because the writers of the Constitution were determined and nearly unanimous in the fact that slave states should not be able to have greater representation by using their slave population. That's why they reduced that down to 3/5 per slave, and which was a compromise. But no, our country really is.
Which, by the way, if they were such racists, they would have never agreed to that, because they could have used the slaves, as you say, as part of their population for representation into the Congress to do all kinds of things, including never get rid of slavery. So the fact that they were putting in the 3/5 clause was so that they could do away with slavery.
Oh, yeah. It was to disincentivize adding more slave population, so that they wouldn't get the full benefit of it in the slave states, who were really being, most of them, quite intransigent about wanting to keep slavery. Georgia, South Carolina, maybe North Carolina, those states were determined to keep slavery. So that was really evil on their part. But, and again, it's such a convoluted issue, but the reality is everyone knew, and everyone knew that slavery was going to need to go away. The movement headed by William Wilberforce over in England was already well advanced and very near getting the end of slavery in England. It was only just a few short years later that British Parliament made slavery illegal. And then they fought on the seas to stop it. But our country was filled with a majority of people in actual population, in non-slave population, who wanted slavery to go away. Both the Declaration of Independence and the 3/5 clause were time bombs to get rid of slavery. Thomas Jefferson purposefully wrote the Declaration of Independence to imply and to hopefully in the future establish the fact that black slaves that would someday be free would be treated as human beings with all the same rights. There are going to be a lot of people that are going to argue against me on that. That is absolutely the fact. He wanted it to go away. So, we have survived quite a bit. Arlington represents in some ways, the great battle for freedom that ultimately gave freedom to the slaves. The 13th and 14th Amendment established their rights. It was just rancid Supreme Courts later on with Plessy v. Ferguson and some former slaveholders in the South during the Grant administration who fought vociferously to make the lives of former black African slaves hell. And we paid the price for some of those things. But that was a far worse price that we paid than what the founders wanted to do to get rid of that institution ultimately. But we have made it. That racism is at its lowest point in this country. In fact, tables are turned. There's actually white racism amongst some black people, certainly some DEI thought leaders. But we're going to get out of this. We're a good country, and our people know what matters and values human beings by and large. And I think that we've got a resurgence of that coming in this country, and I look forward to the future.
And you have a lot of, and that's evident by, you have a black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell. You have had multiple black citizens on the Supreme Court. black senators, black governors, black mayors. I mean, it's overwhelming. America has made such amazing progress. I'll tell you something else you're seeing that's very common. You're seeing a lot more, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but you're seeing a lot more lighter skinned people marrying darker skinned people. I don't want to say interracial marriage because there's only one race, the human race.
That's right.
There's different people groups. There's different people groups. But interracial marriage is a bad word, and it's a term that has no scientific basis to say that. So people should not use the term interracial marriage because there's only one race, the human race. But you see a lot of people from different people groups, some with lighter skin, some with darker skin, marrying, right? You know, so this is the fact that you see this so commonly now in America. Again, shows you it's not an issue for most people. It's not an issue for most Americans. You know,
no, the population.
My son-in-law is son-in-law is brown skinned. Yeah. My daughter's more pale or light colored skin. My granddaughter obviously is a mixture. This is becoming very common here in the South, even, which again shows you how much progress Americans have made. And no one really thinks about it or talks about it because it's not an issue.
The only people these days that think of race are politicians and political activists on the left. And the population in general just doesn't make it a big deal. It only becomes a big deal if you've got racial tension that individuals bring up. But, it's pocketed for the most part. It's actually just a little bit worse than it was prior to Barack Obama being president, because to be candid, we were in a great place just before that. I remember it vividly. And he stirred it all up again after Ferguson and various things like that as a way to get political advantage. Most of our racial tensions in this country were behind politicians who wanted to use it to offset people against one another so that they could gain political advantage. And it's a sad part of our history. I think we're coming out of it slowly. And Donald Trump, and boy, anyone who sees this video is going to, on the left, is going to freak out for what I'm about to say. Donald Trump has done more than any recent president to make race a non-issue. He just doesn't see it. And that that's the case, not because I said so or even fully because of policies that he's implemented, and those policies have had some difference. It's because of who voted for him in November. November 2024 saw a large Hispanic population voting for Donald Trump. You saw a larger black population vote for Donald Trump than any previous Republican president since the 1930s. And I think it's amazing, that transformation. And Donald Trump has represented that. And I think, he really does understand what this issue is about. And I'm very grateful for how our country seems to be changing in this area. The population doesn't like politicians. They just live their lives, and they try to do so normally.
That's right. Here's the latest tweet, or one of them, by President Trump. I told Canada, which very much wants to be part of our fabulous Golden Dome system, that it will cost $61 billion if they remain a separate but unequal nation, but will cost $0 if they become our cherished 51st state. They're considering the offer. Now, do you really think they're considering the offer? And why does he keep up with this 51st state thing? I'll tell you my opinion, and you tell me yours. I think he's pushing for a North American Union, the merging of America, Mexico, and Canada, and maybe Greenland, because he wants to digitize their asset. He wants to tokenize their asset. He wants to put their assets on our books so that we can right our economic ship. That's the only reason I can think he's doing that and calling for that. What say you?
It's been my opinion for this time period of him doing this, that he'll go all the way and make him the 51st state. He never puts something out there he doesn't think will happen. But I think the negotiation here is to put Canada back in their place, to help the people of Canada know that American liberty at this stage is far superior to Canadian liberty, because Justin Trudeau took it almost all away. And I think that he's trying to make the case, and this tweet supports my viewpoint on this, that he's sick and tired of having us pay for other countries. And we have been paying so much to help Canada's defense, and they've done so little on their own behalf, that really has got to change. So I think it's more about that, but I think he likes to rankle feathers over this 51st state thing, and he'd go all the way if he could. You know, there is a strong move in Manitoba to break away from Canada right now. It's a serious one. The people are just fit to be tied after this last parliamentary election, and if they can make it happen, that's going to happen. And if that happens, you could see the whole house of cards fall up there potentially, except for Quebecers that really hate America.
Here's another one. Other than the rigged presidential election of 2020, the biggest scandal in American history is the auto pen. Whoever used it was usurping the power of the presidency, and it should be very easy to find out who that person or persons is. They did things that Joe Biden, of sound mind, would have never done, like open borders, transgender for everyone, men and women's sports, and far more. Fear not, however, we will bring back America bigger, better, stronger than ever before, end quote. Now, this is at least the second time he says that a sane Joe Biden would never be for these things. I think there's a truth to that. I do, because I said to this audience many, many times, the reason they did put Joe Biden in there was so they could get somebody who didn't have enough wherewithal to know that they were doing these things, because nobody in their right mind who wants to go down in history would do these things. Joe Biden will go down more unpopular than Jimmy Carter, which is saying a lot. Bill Clinton, he wanted people to like him. He wanted to go down in history well, and he moderated. A lot of presidents have moderated. They want to be liked. They want to be well thought of. They start thinking about history. I've said Joe Biden wasn't there enough to think about it, so they could get things done that no person of a sane mind would let them do in their name. So I agree with that. But we also have to remember Joe Biden was still a pro-abort and so many other things, even when he had his mind. He was anti-American. He got America into all kinds of treaties that tied our hands and advanced that of the Soviet Union and others. He was part of the Livable World group. Arnold Hammer. What was it called? Citizens for a Livable World, or whatever it was called. A leftist group had us into one treaty after another, neutering us militarily while Russia and other countries ignored it. So he was a leftist. He was put in by a communist group to run for U.S. Senate. That's why he got there, a small state of Delaware. So I agree partially, but at the same time, Joe Biden was always radical, nut job, put there by the communists. Trevor Loudon has a whole history on this. Council for a Livable World, what it was called. So anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, Armand Hammer was connected to Russia and got a lot of his wealth in his oil production up there and arrangements with them. But beyond that, listen, I think that Donald Trump gives Joe Biden a little bit too much credit. Joe Biden was a chameleon. He went wherever the wind was blowing. I do agree, though, with the fact that I'm convinced he had very little understanding of what was going on in that White House, at least at that deep level that most presidents have it. On the surface, though, he was probably aware enough to see a lot of what was going on. What the recent books prove is that he was, and I think not necessarily purposefully so, is that he was truly as incapacitated as all of us knew him to be when he ran for president in 2020. And I think that we need to recognize not only was his presidency illegitimate as far as it goes with the auto pen situation and the fact that there was a group of people headed up by Ron Klain as chief of staff, and maybe Joe Biden even, that were really running the country when Joe Biden had no idea what was going on. That illegitimacy is real. But I think also we need to come back and reassess what really happened in the 2020 election. We had a lot of actors out there, mostly Democrats on the left, but also the U.S. Chamber of Commerce people. I mean, there's a famous Time magazine article that shows how the U.S. Chamber of Commerce worked to defeat Donald Trump at that time. They were coordinating with the unions to do that. And interestingly, there's union offices right near the White House and close to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. But these people, they were dead serious on taking him out. And there are a lot of nefarious things that took place. We already know that there were constitutional violations in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Nevada, who changed their means of choosing electors through courts, through a consent decree in the case of Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, and the courts in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. They all changed their election rules because of COVID, and that violates Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution. So that alone was a violation that you can point to specifically, but there were a lot more things going on that we all remember. And I've always tried to argue the Article 2 argument. I'm more and more convinced that there was a lot more in the way of what was done in that election to get Joe Biden elected so that the radical left in the party could implement the strategies and the policies that they wanted with someone who would be far too compliant and, in many cases, incapacitated to be able to make proper decisions. So I think we need to look at that. I think our country 100%. Needs to work through that.
But it really shows you how evil Jill, Jill, Jill Biden is. Jill Biden has her mind. She knew, I mean, she obviously has to be either just an outright Marxist, or she's just a political, opportunist who doesn't care, who wanted the power and to be there and all that goes with it. But she knew what they were doing to her husband. She was part of it, I think. So does she not realize the ideology that was being pushed? I think the real story here may be that Jill Biden is one of the most liberal people in America ever.
Hey, listen, this is not without precedent. Woodrow Wilson's wife was literally running the country for the last couple of years of his second term, Woodrow Wilson's term, because he had a massive stroke and he was unable to govern. Yes. They hid it. This is a historical fact. It's not the first time that it's happened. And we really need to take seriously what happened here and do something about it. This is one of the biggest scams in American history. It may be the greatest scam in all of American history politically. And I think we need to expose the history of it so that we never make that mistake again, if at all possible.
I agree. Look at this real quick. Donald Trump, California, under the leadership of radical left Democrat Gavin Newsom, continues to illegally allow men to play in women's sports. This week, a transitioned male athlete at a major event won everything and is now qualified to compete in the state's finals next weekend. I mean, he's disobeying what President Trump has signed. And of course, looks like they're going to hold back large-scale federal funding. Good.
Yeah, as well they should. We also, he's talking about pulling back more stuff related to Harvard. I mean, listen, these people are violating not only basic ethical, moral principles, they literally are violating the law. I mean, this is absolutely absurd. It's one of those things that Joe Biden probably didn't know he was pushing in his dementia or whatever form of it up to dementia he had out of federal policy that was never authorized by Congress. Joe Biden started this thing with federal help. We need to take it away, and Donald Trump has done so. California should pay the price. Maine paid the price. And they back down. I think we need to do it to California as well.
100%. Jim Paff, theconservativecaucus.org, theconservativecaucus.org. Worldview Tube's Washington Report, brought to you in part by you each and every night. WorldviewFoundation.com, WorldviewFoundation.com. Thanks for watching. Take care.